Get out! Get out of my house right now!
You packed this days ago, didn't you?
Don't turn this into some tragedy. Just go.
Fine, I'm going.
Don't think about coming back crying! You have nothing without me!
We'll see. Charles, have the Kensington house ready by tomorrow morning.
The suitcase had already been packed before he told her. That was the detail Elena Whitmore would carry with her longer than anything else about that night. Not the rain, not the words, not the particular careful tone of a man who had rehearsed a difficult conversation until the difficulty had been engineered out of it. The suitcase. Sitting at the bottom of the stairs. Already done. Which meant the conversation she had just been included in had already happened, somewhere else, without her, and she was simply the last to be informed. Daniel Whitmore said it was better if she found somewhere else tonight. He said he had packed what she would need. He said he had met someone else and that the relationship was serious and that he thought it best, that phrase. It's best, deployed with the measured confidence of a man who had decided what was best for both of them without consulting one of them. Elena had looked at the suitcase. She had looked at him. She had asked how long. He had not answered. She had understood that the silence was the answer, and that the answer was long enough to make the word serious feel inadequate. She picked up the suitcase. She walked to the door. The November rain was doing what November rain does in England, making everything heavier, wetter, darker, more emphatic. She stood on the front step for a moment. Daniel appeared in the doorway. He said she would be all right. He said she always landed on her feet. Elena looked at him with the particular expression of someone who has just heard the thing that confirms everything, and then she turned away and took out her phone. She called a number. She said 3 sentences into the phone in the voice of someone who had been waiting, for a very long time, to say exactly these 3 sentences. Then she stood in the rain and waited for a car that was not a taxi. The door behind her closed. She did not turn around. Daniel Whitmore had married Elena Reeves 9 years ago at a registry office in Hammersmith with 30 guests and a lunch at a restaurant he had chosen. He was a financial analyst, moderately successful, comfortably housed in a 4-bedroom semi-detached in Clapham, the owner of a car 2 years newer than the one he needed. He had a way of explaining things that he found clarifying. He had spent 9 years assuming that Elena's careful approach to money was the careful approach of someone without much margin. He had been wrong in the specific, comprehensive way that people are wrong when they have never asked a sufficient number of questions. Elena Reeves had grown up knowing 2 things about herself that she had told almost nobody. The first was that she was considerably better at architecture than her junior title at the firm where she and Daniel had met suggested, and that this would eventually become apparent whether or not she announced it. The second was that her grandfather, a man named George Reeves who had made a very large amount of money in commercial property development in the 1970s and 1980s and had spent the remainder of his life being careful about who knew how much, had left behind something that had been carefully maintained and quietly compounding across the decades. Her mother had inherited it. Elena had inherited it from her mother. The solicitor who had managed the Reeves family's legal affairs for 30 years, a careful, precise man named Charles Pemberton, had explained the full picture to Elena on her 19th birthday in a meeting she had prepared for with a notebook. She had left that meeting with a thorough understanding of what her future held and a grandmother's principle pressed into her like a second inheritance. Specific information goes to people who have earned it. Daniel had not earned it. Not because Elena had been strategic or calculating, but because 9 years of careful observation had not produced a marriage she trusted with the full truth of herself, and she had understood this gradually and accepted it without drama and continued to manage what was hers with the same quiet competence her grandfather had managed what was his. The estate had compounded in the years of her marriage with the particular silent efficiency of well-managed wealth. By the night Daniel packed the suitcase, it represented an amount that would have made his moderate financial analyst's mind go very still for a very long time. Charles Pemberton answered on the 3rd ring. He was 71 years old and had been expecting this call, or one like it, for several years. He listened to Elena in the rain with the focused patience of someone who has been waiting for his client to be ready. She said 3 things. She said it was time to move forward with the property. She said she needed the Kensington house prepared by tomorrow morning. She said to have everything else ready to begin on Wednesday. Charles Pemberton said understood to all three, and that he would make the necessary calls tonight. Elena thanked him. She put her phone away. She stood in the rain for another moment, not in distress, not in grief, but in the particular stillness of someone who has just set something in motion that has been waiting to be set in motion for a long time. Then the car arrived, not a taxi but the specific car service she had used for family purposes for years, and she gave the driver an address in Chelsea where a friend who had always known everything was already awake and waiting. The estate had compounded in the years of her marriage with the particular silent efficiency of well-managed wealth. By the night Daniel packed the suitcase, it represented an amount that would have made his moderate financial analyst's mind go very still for a very long time. Elena had chosen not to discuss it with Daniel because she had not been asked. She had also chosen not to discuss it because in the early years she had been cautious, had wanted to be known for herself first, wanted to be certain of the marriage. By the later years she had begun to understand that the marriage was not what she had hoped, and had updated the principle accordingly. She had managed what was hers with the same quiet competence her grandfather had managed what was his. She had simply been waiting, with characteristic patience, for the correct moment. The property at 14, Pemberton Gardens, Kensington, had belonged to the Reeves family since 1987. It was not technically a house. It was a Grade 2 listed Georgian townhouse on one of the quietest and most desirable streets in the borough, 5 floors including the basement, 6 bedrooms, a garden that had been designed by someone who had subsequently become quite well known for their gardens, and a value that the current property market placed at £40 million. Elena had been there hundreds of times. She knew which floorboard creaked on the 3rd step. She knew the particular way the morning light came through the first floor drawing room windows in winter. She knew that the boiler, entirely adequate, made a sound between midnight and 1 a.m. that had startled every uninformed guest who had ever stayed. She arrived at 10 o'clock the following morning in the car the service had sent. She was wearing the cream pantsuit she had bought the previous spring and worn once. It was the closest thing she had packed to armor, and she had chosen it deliberately. The gates of 14, Pemberton Gardens were the tall black iron gates with the gold details that her grandfather had installed in 1991. They opened as the car turned into the street. Elena got out. She looked at the house. She walked through the gates, up the steps, and opened the front door with the original key on a chain she had carried for years. She went inside. She stood in the hallway where she had stood many times before, and she took a slow breath. Then she went upstairs to the first floor drawing room and she looked at the morning light coming through the windows exactly as she had always known it would. Daniel Whitmore found out on Thursday. Not from Elena. Elena had not contacted him in any form. The letter arrived on Wednesday morning from Pemberton and Associates, which meant nothing to Daniel on Wednesday morning and a great deal more by Wednesday afternoon. He read it 3 times. It was courteous and precise. It said that Elena Whitmore née Reeves would be seeking a divorce on the grounds of irretrievable breakdown. It said she was financially independent and sought nothing from the marital estate. It said her legal team would be in contact. The last paragraph noted, with the understated precision of a firm that had been practicing for 30 years, that all future correspondence should be directed to Elena's representatives as she had taken up residence at her primary property. Primary property. Daniel had sat with those 2 words for a long time. On Thursday, a colleague forwarded him an article from the property section of a national newspaper. The Reeves family townhouse at 14, Pemberton Gardens had been confirmed as under new active occupation after years of managed rental income. The piece mentioned that the property had been most recently valued at £40 million. The colleague sent it with a single question mark. Daniel did not reply. He spent a significant portion of Thursday attempting to reconcile the woman who had lived in his Clapham semi-detached for 9 years, who had packed her own lunches, driven a practical car, managed the household with what he had understood as the careful economy of someone without much margin, with the woman who owned a £40 million townhouse in Kensington and had called her solicitor in the rain at 11:49 p.m. without hesitation. He could not reconcile them. The reconciliation required information he had not thought to gather across 9 years of marriage, and the absence of that information was, in the end, entirely his own. Elena did not make a public statement. She did not call his family or his colleagues or the woman he had chosen instead of her. She moved into the house in Kensington and began restructuring her life with the same steady competence she had always brought to everything, to the architecture practice she had quietly established 3 years into the marriage using her own resources, which had won 2 industry awards in the last year that Daniel had not known about because the practice itself was something Daniel had not known existed. She had conversations with Charles Pemberton. She had coffee with her friend in Chelsea. She had the 3rd step of the Pemberton Gardens staircase repaired. The divorce was clean and quick. The settlement asked Daniel for nothing, which he understood, after sitting with it for several days, was not generosity. It was clarity. Elena Whitmore asked for nothing from Daniel Whitmore because there was nothing of his that she needed, and she wanted him to know it precisely and completely. She had always been precise. He had simply not been paying close enough attention. She did not remove the gates. They were, she had decided on her first morning back in the house, watching the light move across the drawing room floor, not slightly much at all. They were her grandmother's principal made iron. They were the boundary around something that had been carefully maintained and wisely managed, and finally, on a wet November night on a Clapham pavement, brought fully into the world. They were exactly right. They had always been exactly right. She was simply, finally, on the correct side of them.